Hello and welcome to this short video guide from the School of Business and Creative Industries Ethics Committee. This guide is about making an application for ethical approval via the Ethical Review Manager system, also known as ERM. This video should be used in conjunction with the applicant user guide. In fact, the applicant user guide should be your first port of call when you're making an application for ethical approval. You can find the applicant user guide at the link below, and you can also find a copy of the applicant user guide on this website. This video is an abridged version of the applicant user guide. The first thing you need to do to access ERM is to log in, and you'll see on the screen before you the link to log in. This link is also available on this website, and it's also available on the UWS website. Once you're ready to log in, you should select the correct domain, UWS staff or UWS student, and then log in with the university email address and password. And you do need to make sure you've used the correct domain or you won't be able to log in. Once you're logged in, you will see your work area. And to create a new project, you have to go to the Actions section of the work area and click the Create New Project icon as highlighted below. Once you've clicked that, a pop-up will open up, and in that pop-up, you will be asked to add a project title. You should give your project a title, and that title should be normally the same name as your dissertation or your wider research project. You'll be then asked to confirm whether this is a historical or a new application, and you should select New Application. Once you've done so, you click the green Create button, and the system will create your application. You will then see your application back on the landing page with the title at the top of the page, and then below that you will see the different sections that you have to fill in your application form. The first of those sections is the filter section, and that's the one that's highlighted with the arrow. To access the filter section, you click on the word filter. This will then open up the filter pages. What's really important is that the first question you're asked is to confirm that you've read the UWS and school guidelines around ethical conduct in research. And it is really important that you do read and understand these guidelines because you should be making reference to how you're keeping with those guidelines in your application. The second thing you'll be asked to do is select the categories that are relevant to your application, whether you have human participants, personal data, animals, risk to the investigator, or none of the above. If you click none of the above, ERM will then put you out of the system and say you don't need to make an ethical application because your research does not involve any of the risk characteristics. However, if you have human participants, personal data, animals, or risk investigator, you'll be invited to create a full application. Once you have identified that you have risk and you are taken into the full application system, you will be listed as the principal investigator, and your details will be automatically populated into the system. You should, however, select your status in the university, so whether staff, undergraduate, or postgraduate student. If your information is not in there, then you can add it manually. The next page is all about the title of the study, so some duplication here, and also the primary purpose of the study. So what you should do is that you should type in the title of your study and then select the primary purpose of your study. And for the majority of us, the primary purpose will be research. You should save using the save icon, which is highlighted on the screen, regularly as you go. And this is very important because if your browser crashes, then you would lose all of the information that you put into the application so far. So do click the save button regularly as you go. Once you've given us the title of the study and the primary purpose of the study, you should then tell us where the research would take place. So whether it's taking place on a campus, where that campus is, or whether it's taking place in an external location. Please be specific and tell us where the research will take place. You will then tell us how the cost of the study will be met. This is important if you have external funding, to be clear about who your funder is. For the majority of undergraduate and postgraduate studies, this will be self-funded or funded by the university. But if you do have an external funder, please make it clear who your funder is. On the next screen, you will be asked to tell us all about whether your project has been considered by another ethics committee. And for the majority of us, that will be no. But if this is a collaboration between a number of universities, then you might find that yes, there has been another ethics committee look at this, and you should tell us that so the ethics committee can consider the other application at the time they're looking at yours. The next thing you'll be asked to do is to give a justification of the purpose, design, and methodology of your study. And this is the first area where you'll really be giving us lots of information about your study. Now, this says word limit of 1,000 words, but you don't have to use all of those 1,000 words. And I just want to very quickly tell you what we're looking for here in this box, because this is the first really important box of the study. Here, we want you to explain why it is that you are conducting your study and why you need to have participants or risk to the researcher or personal data in your study. Why is it important that you have to have one of these high risk categories? That's what we're looking for you to explain. You're looking to give a justification why you have to have human participants, personal data, animals, or risk to the researcher. And you want to make that compelling. We also want to know about your methodology, how you're going to conduct this study. What we don't want to see is a cut and paste of a methodology chapter from a dissertation. Instead, what we want is a nice, short, succinct explanation of I am going to use this methodology to collect my data, and this is why that methodology is suitable and fair and ethical. So that's really all we're looking for here. We're looking for you to explain why it's important for you to have participants, risk to the researcher or personal data in your study, and then explain the methodology you're going to use to gather your data with a focus on, rather than giving us a methodological argument, with a focus on explaining how your methodology is fair and equitable to the participants, to yourself, or to any animals involved in your project. Below that, you should tell us how your project has been reviewed prior to making your application. So normally this would be via your supervisor, but it could also be, if it's a staff application, by another member of the team. And you would tick whatever response is relevant in there. Once you've done this, we would then like to know about your sample size. And what we want to know when you're telling us about your sample size is why you're having the sample you've got and why the sample you have is relevant to your study. So your sample might be small. And that's okay. Tell us why it's small. Your sample might be very large, and that's okay. Tell us why it's large. And again, what we're looking for is an explanation of why you have to have the sample that you have and why it's ethical for you to do so. So if you are asking an awful lot of people and asking an awful lot of people to give up time, then why is that ethical? And again, there's no right or wrong here. It's really what suits your study. But please do explain and justify your intended sample size rather than just tell us what your sample size is. Below this, we want to know how you're going to analyze and present that data. And this is very important because what we want to see here is how you're going to disseminate your data. So who are you going to share this data with? Is your dissertation, your research project going to be made public? Is it going to be kept within a university library? Are you going to share this information in other ways? How are you going to share your participants' data with the wider community? And I want you to be careful in this explanation because what you have to do is demonstrate that you've got care for your participants in the way that you are disseminating their data. Below that, there's a question that specifically asks if you're going to use interviews or questionnaires, and for the majority of people with participants, that will be the case, and you simply select yes or no. If you've selected yes, you will then have to upload the questionnaires for your study so that the ethics committee can have a look at these. And all you do is, as normal, you click the browse button to look at the files on your computer. You select the file that's relevant to you, and then you click the upload button, and that will add your interview transcripts or whatever the case. Not transcripts, excuse me, your interview questions or whatever the case may be. Once you have uploaded it, you will then see your uploaded document and it will appear in the bar and you'll have the opportunity to download that or delete it if it's the wrong version and change it. You'll also see the blue button in the screen before us, which allows you to create and add another document if you need to add an additional document. Below that, you will then be asked a very important question that you must consider, is whether or not your interviews or questions will discuss topics that might be sensitive, embarrassing, or upsetting for participants, or are you potentially going to lead to participants disclosing criminal action or action that requires you to take further action during the study. So, for instance, embarrassing or sensitive topics could be as simple as collecting data on gender. So that would require you to take a yes answer if you are going to collect data on gender, because that's sensitive. So for the most of us, we probably will have to click yes for this, and you don't really click no if you're not collecting any personal or sensitive data at all. Once you have completed this section, you will then be taken on to another screen where you'll be asked to tell us whether your participants are paid to take part. And normally that will be no, but occasionally it will be yes. And if it is yes, you will then confirm some further details. We also want to know about the expected duration of participants in the study. And again, there's an ethical consideration here, because what we don't want to see is for you to be taking an inordinate amount of time up for your participants unless you have a valid reason to do so. So tell us how long you intend for your participants to be involved in the study. But also give a rationale for why that is fair and equitable for you to ask for that amount of time for your participants. Below that, you'll be asked if you're obtaining informed consent, and we should all obtain informed consent for our participants. You should not have a study going through the ethics committee that does not obtain informed consent. That will be one of the main reasons you would have your application returned to you, is that you didn't seek to obtain informed consent. The next question asks whether it's likely to cause discomfort or distress, either physical or psychological. And so you do have to think carefully about this, and you can ask questions that that can cause discomfort or deal with distress, but you will have to provide a rationale and mitigating circumstances for you to do so. So think very carefully about that, whether you are going to ask questions that may cause that. And again, you're not precluded from doing research that does so, you just have to provide mitigating circumstances. Below that, you'll be asked if the research does involve any invasive procedures. For the vast majority of our research, that will be no. But if you do ask an applicant to, for example, try on different stage makeups, then that would be a physically invasive procedure, and you should declare that, and again explain mitigating circumstances. But very, very unlikely that you would have that in your study. Once you have completed that section, you'll be moved on to tell us a little bit about how you are going to gather your informed consent. And your informed consent would normally be gathered via a consent form and a participant information sheet, which is known as a PIS. So we're looking for two things here: a participant information sheet and a copy of your consent form. And there are templates available for those on this website. And you should then upload your participant information sheet and upload a copy of your consent form to the application. You should liaise directly with your supervisor to make sure that your consent form and your participant information sheet are effective, well put together. And you should also include the details of the ethics committee and your supervisor, if you have one, on your participant information sheet and your consent forms. And you upload these the same way as you uploaded the last set of documents. You click the blue browse button and you upload after you've looked through your computer. Once you have finished with that screen, you then move on to one of the last sections. And this one is all about other ethical considerations. And this asks if you are planning to deceive in your study. And for the vast majority of studies in our area, you should be saying no to that. It's unlikely we would approve studies that involve deception. But although there can be some studies that do involve some element of deception, such as placebo use, but these are not relevant to us. So for the most part, you are not looking for any studies that involve deception. Will the participants be debriefed after the participation? It's really up to you whether you want to do that or not. Good practice would be to have some way to debrief with your participants. It makes them feel more involved in the project, but you don't have to do that, and you just tell us yes or no. If you tell us yes, we'll ask for a little bit more detail on how you do that. Below this, there's a generic question: are there any other ethical considerations to bring to the attention of the committee? And that's entirely up to you. For the majority of applications, it will be no. But if there's anything else in your mind you want us to consider, then pop it in there and we will have a look at it. Below, you'll find information on personal data. Now, this is very important because the storage of personal data is regulated, as I'm sure you're aware. There's GDPR regulations that are very specific about how we store others' data, especially if it's personal data. So there's two questions here. There's the measures you'll put in place to ensure the confidentiality of personal data, and then there's who will have access to the data collected. So the first one relates to personal data, and the second one relates to data as a whole across the whole of your study. In both cases, that we should look for applications using the UWS OneDrive account to store the data. So you all have a OneDrive account, and you should be using that OneDrive account. And what that does is that gives the data controller of the university more control of your data, more safeguarding of that data. So for both of these, I would make it clear that you're going to store your data on UWS OneDrive account as opposed to a personal laptop or a mobile device, which are not secure. For the second question, who will have access to the data? Normally that would be yourself, your supervisor, but there may be some other people who might have access to the data. So you should explain who will have access and then how you'll keep it confidential. And again, if you're using UWS OneDrive, it's very easy for you to demonstrate how you will keep the data confidential. Once you have finished with the main application, you're then moved over to the signatures page. And what you would do is you would sign this as principal investigator. So you've made the application and then you would sign this. And you do that by clicking the sign button. So it's quite straightforward. You'll obviously be asked to agree with the declaration you can see on the screen before you. Now, the signature page will ask you to electronically sign the form, and it's simply done by putting in your login details. And that then nobody else can sign this form bar you, because hopefully nobody else bar you knows your login details. So it's just an added security measure there. If you are a student and you're making an application, then what you should also do is request the signature of your supervisor or your director of studies. And to do that, you click the request signature button below your signature, and you would put in the email address of your supervisor and a message to your supervisor, and then click the request button to ask them to sign off on your project. Now, your supervisor should be dealing with this project all throughout the application. They should be helping you go through this. They should see a draft of your application, hopefully, before you put it in. So this should be a straightforward process where your supervisor says, yes, I've seen the application and I approve. And what I would encourage you to do as a student is discuss your ethics application with your supervisor before you put it in for approval. The more you discuss it with the supervisor, the more you get the thing into a good shape, the less likely it is to be returned. So you should take this up with your supervisor as much as you can. Once you've asked for your supervisor's signature, you can then move down, and once you've received your supervisor's signature, you can go down and click the submit button. And this is done in the actions area. So we're going back into the actions area. And you look down to the very bottom of the actions area and you will see the submit button. And it's very important you do click the submit button, or else your application will just always sit at draft and won't actually come to the committee. So once you're happy with the submission, once you've received the signatures, you click the submit button. The submit button will then send your application to the ethics committee, and we will then endeavour to respond to your application within 15 working days. 15 working days. And what will normally happen is that you will receive an approval letter saying your project is approved, or we might get back to you and say, can you make the following changes in order for us to give you approval? And then you would have to resubmit your application, and the 15-day clock would start again. Hopefully that's been some help for you as a guide to guiding you through the process of making an application. Please do use this video in conjunction with the written guide, because the written guide is obviously much easier to use when you're sitting at the computer. You can just work through the guide and look at the screen at the same time. Thank you very much for listening.